Well, let me hopefully not ramble too much, but I'd love to just be able to tell you a little bit about some background and then our church context here at First Baptist Collierville, give you a little bit about planning services, context of the ministry, and then I'm glad to answer questions at any time. And I can only see some of you at certain times. And so if somebody raises their hand and I don't see, just let me know because I can't see everybody. It's a good class here. So as Dr. Brown said, we're at First Baptist. We're a suburb or a town of Memphis. Everybody know where Memphis is? Some of you, that's great. So we're in the most western part of Tennessee, in the bottom left-hand corner. Tennessee is a very wide state, East Tennessee to West Tennessee. So my family and I, we actually were born and raised here. I was born and raised here in Memphis and was here until left for seminary, so graduated college and then left for Southern Seminary. I was there from beginning of 2010 to the end of 2012, so just right at 3 years. And then we've been serving. I served for 3 years in Charlotte, North Carolina as an associate worship pastor. And then before moving here, was a worship pastor in Middle Georgia, a place called Warner Robins, Georgia, for just under 6 years. And then the Lord saw fit to bring us here. And we never dreamed in ministry that we'd be able to minister in our hometown. But the Lord's been very kind and gracious to us in that. So it was just a little over a year ago. It was last March we got to move back here, and we've been at the helm here at First Baptist. And we've been walking through a lot of rebuilding, as probably a lot of you have seen in different churches and contexts through the pandemic. But we're seeing a lot of great things happening right now. In terms of our music and worship ministry, the context and a little bit of background and what we look like is that we are a very intentional intergenerational worship church. And so my pastor has been here for just under 20 years. He'll actually celebrate 20 years next year. Our church will celebrate 150 years since a rechartering after burning down and dissipating during the Civil War. But he's been here almost 20 years, and he leads so well in our church in a couple of different areas. And I think one of those things is an importance of seeing generations worshiping the Lord together. So we have one service time. We meet at 10:45 on Sundays, and we utilize a choir and an orchestra and a rhythm section every Sunday, with the exception of a break in July. In the month of July, we go down to a smaller team just to give folks some break, and I'm glad to talk about that later. So we're utilizing a larger ministry context there with choir and orchestra. I'm a big champion of choirs. I don't think it's unholy if you don't have a choir, but I think there's a lot of great impact that happens if you do, and you can use that in all kinds of ways. And we use orchestra and band as well. So yeah, a lot of our preparation begins months in advance, and so my pastor a lot of times will give me a couple of months in advance of what he's going to be going over in terms of study and in terms of his preaching topics or a sermon series. So for instance, over the summer, we did a series in the Psalms. He's actually going to be in Psalms 8, I believe, this coming Sunday. That's his last one for this series. So we were planning that for a number of months before that. I'm part of what's called a senior staff here, which makes up of our senior pastor, myself, and our executive pastor, and then he's essentially our student pastor and communications director. So he oversees our communications with the church. And so we meet weekly outside of our normal staff meeting time, and we go over services. The student minister / communications director is kind of like the associate pastor in terms of preaching here. So whenever Pastor Chuck is out of town, AJ will be the one who typically fills the pulpit unless we have a guest come in, which happens a couple of times a year. So the reason I say that is to say we talk a lot about services, direction of services, the meat and potatoes of the scripture that we're going to be looking over, and we're looking at that a lot in advance. So I'm looking a few weeks, if not a few months, at different things. A lot of times, my first thing that I'm looking at scheduling, and this may be foreign to some of you if you haven't been in a ministry with a choir or orchestra, a lot of times I'm looking first off at scheduling way in advance songs that I would consider what we call presentational pieces. So songs that we're presenting or choir specials, they've also been called, because that usually takes a little bit more preparation and work to get ready, right? If we're looking at congregational songs, those are typically, unless it's a new song, we can have one or maybe two rehearsals. And so I can bring those in closer to service time, but I'm probably working 2 to 3 months out at least of what particular song we're going to be doing individual Sundays. So like as of right now, it's August 31st. I have all the way through December planned on what our choir and orchestra is doing on those Sundays, because some of these pieces, they take a good 4 or 5 weeks to work up, and so that's a lot of time frame there. So one of the first things I'm looking at is, after I know what's happening in the service, where the pastor's wanting to go with his message, his sermon, his topic, I'm looking at what I think would fit into those from choir and orchestra standpoint. Then I start looking at song service, congregational songs. What am I looking for there? And so then I start praying, asking the Lord. A lot of times what I'm doing is I'm reading through his text for a couple of weeks as well. So I've been reading in Psalm 8, and I'm just asking the Lord to give me direction and discernment on where I need to go with songs that will match up, or at least in some way tie in. It doesn't necessarily always have to be a direct, this song has 19 verses that talks about the context of that particular scripture that day. 19 verses, a little much, right? Y'all doing okay? All right, good. And so I actually never seen a song with 19 verses. Maybe you have, but some songs may just have a word or a phrase that'll tie into that particular sermon that day. And so I'm all the time trying to find things that will go in there. And so then a few weeks out, I'm probably 3 to 4 weeks out in terms of full service planning. So I've got just about all of September planned, and that's choir orchestra songs, all of our congregational songs, and for the most part, transitional statements and scripture, call to worship, or long instrumental sections. A lot of times if we have an 8-measure instrumental section, I will try to tie in either by reading a scripture, reading a statement about worship or what's taking place in that moment, or have scripture up on the screens. A lot of times that's a way to be able to fill in, so we can still have that reflective instrumental time and let the instruments be a part of that worship for that moment, but have some kind of something going on for the congregation to be pondering while that's happening. So that's kind of service planning. We utilize Planning Center. Everybody know what Planning Center is, or have a little bit of a grasp of it? Yeah. So Planning Center is a great tool. I don't know how worship pastors did ministry before Planning Center. So it is a great resource and tool, particularly with music and with scheduling people. And so we utilize that. Our entire choir and orchestra is connected and hooked up through Planning Center. So they're able to listen to music and see that music on a weekly basis. And we schedule them through that. And that then kind of gets into our, so that's kind of in terms of preparation with music. Does anybody have any questions in terms of what that looks like with us, or anything I can clarify, anything confusing at all?
Does your orchestra and your rhythm section rehearse together or separately?
So they rehearse together, the orchestra and the rhythm section do. Well, it's kind of a both and, actually, Dr. Brown, because what we do is we do a combined time together, and then our rhythm section and orchestra will split. So in terms of rehearsal, unless there are any other questions on preparation or anything that interested anybody?
One question.
We got a couple. Go ahead.
Cool.
Okay. How far ahead do you prep? How many sets do you have ahead of you before you play?
In terms of planning and knowing what we're going to do, or at times during practice?
Knowing and planning what you're going to do.
Yeah. So like I was saying there, I would probably, so for our choir and orchestra, like the specials, the anthems, the big beefy kind of presentational pieces, we're planned out usually about 3 months approximately. So I've got to the end of the year planned out for that. In terms of the rest of the service, like with congregational songs that we're all engaged in singing together, that's probably roughly 3 to 4 weeks. So I've got all of September pretty much planned out at this point, as best I can. And of course, things change. Things are always in flux. You have to be ready in ministry, be able to make those changes because of cultural things that happen in the life of your church. I'm sure your pastors will never talk to you 2 days before Sunday and say, hey, I'm doing a different sermon on Sunday. But it does happen. I think Dr. Lewis can attest to that as well. Dr. Brown, those. So you have to be ready and flexible in those moments. So you do the best you can plan. But I was once told that in ministry, you have to have what's the saying? You have to have oh gosh, it's a phrase that says something like this. You have to have a rigid hold on to flexibility. And I'm butchering that statement, but you have to be able to be flexible in every moment there. So, but yeah, that's kind of the calendar of planning there. So probably 3 months out for choir and orchestra planning, and then congregational probably about 3 to 4 weeks.
Chloe? I think he did.
Okay.
They have their own time, and then they are together.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask a similar thing about choir and vocalists,
Okay.
and how you efficiently use everybody's time if you just have one rehearsal night.
So vocal team and choir, in order to not waste, you're not going to waste the choir's time by having them sit there while you're working with the vocal team. So how do you handle that?
Yeah.
Or with the band or what? Right. All the different groups of people.
Right on. Yeah. So the full context of our rehearsal. So we rehearse on Wednesdays. Here's the format for our rehearsal. We start together at 6 o'clock in our worship center, and that's choir, our frontline team, which is our mic singers, our orchestra, and our rhythm section. And we have 30 minutes up front where we do some final prep for a special song on Sunday or anything that we want to kind of hit together. And so we're in the worship center for 30 minutes together, which is not ideal. I don't know that I would recommend that unless you have to. The reason we're doing it that way is because we have about 60 kids in a kids choir that meets in our choir room from 5:45 to 6:30 because they're kind of too big to be anywhere else, and it's a good setting for them to be in. So we ultimately, if I were to have it, if it was an ideal world, we would do it flip-flop of what we do. We would have separate rehearsals and then come in together at the end. So if you're able to do that, I think that's the best thing. But we kind of, you always have to do what's best for your particular context. So we start at 6 all together, and we work over things that we've been working for 3 or 4 weeks, tie in some congregational songs and things like that. And that's me leading that whole time together for 30 minutes, 6 to 6:30. At 6:30, we then split, and all vocals, so that's choir and frontline team, go to our choir room, and orchestra and rhythm section break up there. So our rhythm section stays in the worship center, still connected to amps and sound system. Orchestra goes into the orchestra room, and they rehearse, parts and licks and stuff like that, anything that they need to hit. So we still have that extreme beneficial time for an hour. So that's 6:30, 7:30, where we can really go over. So that's our fine-tuning choral time, fine-tuning instrument time there that happens.
Yep, go ahead.
Are your musicians volunteers from the congregation, or are they church members who are also paid, or are they hired from the outside? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's actually a little bit of all three. And so 98% of our entire worship ministry, maybe 97%, is all volunteer. Our main paid people are our accompanist, and then I have a guy who plays lead electric guitar who's kind of like an MD as well, so he kind of runs our rhythm section, and he's paid. And then our lead trumpet player, who's a band director, member of our church, and he's kind of our orchestra director. And then I think that's just about it in terms of those who are playing instruments and singing. I have other staff members who are doing stuff, but in terms of musicians, so everybody else is volunteer. I'm a big believer in that. It's a lot of work, and you've got to do a lot of work, but you've got to equip the saints. We're not, the scriptures don't tell us to pay people, right? It doesn't say pay people to come lead your church and worship. Now, there are particular things that I think you've got to have. You want to have that accompanist. She's there, he or she is there all the time at every rehearsal, learning so much music, and you need that stability. So there are a couple of positions that I would definitely recommend. But then the third part of that is that we do hire from outside the church. So for instance, my drummer is going to be out this Sunday. We're bringing in a young man who's subbing in, for Sunday. So really it's kind of all three, but our our drive here is that we're going to be using as many volunteers as we can, and we're going to be building people up, which is why I'm a big believer in kids and student music as well. So that's a great question, man.
I want to point out something kind of hidden in what you not hidden, but it's in what you said, but not brought out. When you're in a church where you have need for and budget to pay some people, probably a good principle is that people are not paid long-term on a continual basis just to play or just to sing. The people you said you're paying are people who have leadership responsibilities, right?
That's
So,
correct. Yeah,
and
they're church members too.
right.
Yeah, so it's not just necessarily. And everybody needs to consider their particular context. I think that's a great point that Dr. Brown brings up here, is that that these are people who are engaged and invested in our church already, but
Right.
they have particular love and passion for the ministry and are willing to do that. And since they carry that extra responsibility, we're able to do something for them. It's not a lot. It's just a way to say thank you and just for their extra preparation for rehearsals, score study, things like that.
I think the students here, there's enough part-time positions represented here that we all know the standard on that sort of thing. David,
Yeah.
you had a question?
Yeah, sure. So how do you deal with people that they want to serve in the worship team, but they don't have the basis of music and they don't even know how to sing or play an instrument? You know what I mean? Like, how do you
Yeah.
tell them, like, no, thank you, but
This
their feelings.
Yeah, no, this is not an approved topic that Dr. Brown sent me beforehand, so I can't discuss that. I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And this is where I'm very thankful and proud to see all of you here in the pastoral learning that you're doing. It's a totally different world, right? How many of you actually did music degrees in undergrad? If you did undergrad, you did music degrees, right? Okay, so I did the same thing. I did music education at the University of Memphis, and I was in every ensemble known to man. And I mean, I'll just be honest with you. If you weren't good, the director would just say, "You're out of here. You're terrible. You need to either get better or it's a totally different context." We not only can we not do that, we shouldn't do that in ministry, right? We need to lead past people pastorally. And this is where you have the opportunity to do those kind of things. Now, to say that, there are going to be times where you have to protect the ministry overall in understanding whether somebody is not musically where they need to be, or even where their heart and their mind is not where they need to be. So we've got to address all those things, right? There were people who will try to be in your ministry to promote themselves in their own kingdoms, and they could not give a lick about what is what's the most for God's glory. They're trying to shine themselves. So yeah, so we've had those situations. What I would recommend to you, if you have somebody who wants to be involved in your ministry, here I'll give you for instance. This happened a few weeks ago. We had a young lady who was interested in playing guitar in our rhythm section. She grew up in our student ministry, and she played bass guitar for student ministry. But she was very interested in playing. We had a rhythm guitar opening at the time, a rhythm electric guitar position and opening, not a paid volunteer, but we didn't have anybody at the time, and she was interested in doing that. So she came and auditioned for me, young lady. She was about to graduate and go to University of Memphis here soon. And she came, and she really wasn't good on the instrument, had very little grasp of chord structure and things like that. And even the prepared music that she had brought, she really wasn't there. And of course, I think you have to be able to sense nerves in those moments. It's nerve-wracking auditioning for something. But it was at that time in that juncture where I had to make a decision. I can either put her in a position where she probably will struggle, which is going to be a disappointment and even a discouragement to her, or I can go a different route. So my big route up front, when I have either a choir person come in who's struggling or an instrumental, is that I never immediately say no forever and ever, amen, right? My frame of thought is that I want to give them something to work on. Okay, so if it's a vocalist who's struggling with tone, intonation, breath support, or they can't sing anything, I might talk them and recommend about maybe some voice lessons or things like that. Hey, here's what I'd like to see you do to build up to where we can meet again in a couple months and evaluate where you're at. So it's never, I'm sorry, this isn't working out. Thanks for coming in, right? It's always something that tries to encourage them to say, you're not quite where you need to be. Here's what I think we can do to get there. And then let's reevaluate, you know? So this young lady, I talked to her, I said, hey, look, I think that, first off, thank you for coming and auditioning and wanting to be a part of our ministry. I'm so thankful for that. And then I talked to her, I just said, here's where I think we are right now. I think that this is still kind of a newer instrument for you, right? And you're still kind of learning this. And I'm afraid if I put you in this position, that's going to be a discouragement to you because you're not going to be right where I think you want to be. You see, so I'm kind of using this tone of care and concern. But here's what I'd like to do. I'd love for you to continue practicing and learning. I'll give you some resources, connect you with even some local guitar instructors. And then maybe here in a couple of months, let's meet again, kind of evaluate, see where you are. And then what that does is it puts it on that person, whether or not they want to, if they're upset and they just like, no, thanks, then, then that is kind of what it is there. But if they want to put in that work, it shows that they're willing to take that guidance. They're gonna put that in, and then, hey, Pastor Joshua, I'd love to try out again. Hey, that's great. Let's talk about that and see where you are. So that's kind of my mindset, there. I never want to say no immediately up front. I always want to say we're not quite there yet. Here's where we can go. So that's kind of what I do.
I want to jump in with that, what you said, Joshua, because at certain points in my life, I would have heard what Joshua just said and go, yeah, I can't see that someone actually doing that. But I have at this point in my life. In fact, there was a student who was not a worship student at Southern that wanted desperately to be on the worship team, vocalist at his church. And he was the worship pastor who I know spoke to him in a similar tone, similar words to what Joshua just shared. And he actually signed up for voice lessons, not part of anything, not a music student. And I was able to work with him on the stuff that he was, and he went back a semester later and he's singing on a worship team now. And his worship pastor's like, he's like, I can't believe he actually did this.
Mm-hmm.
So he not only demonstrated that he put into work musically, but that he had the right spirit of service, that he just wanted to worship.
Yeah.
And that he wanted to do what he could. And you can think that the musical problem is the biggest problem, especially with people that want to put their mouth on a mic. The biggest problems you run into are going to be spiritual problems, not musical ones usually. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate your story about what to do, Joshua. Did anybody else have any questions? But yeah, go ahead.
What do you do, especially you get hired at a new church, maybe it's a small one, and the team is not really recognizing your authority as a worship pastor or leader, and then they start like directing the band for you, and then you start creating conflict? How do you resolve, especially as a new hire at a church, and how does God love them as a worship pastor or leader? How do you address that situation?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that all goes down to leadership, right? Leadership is not something that just happens. You may be in a position of authority, but leadership doesn't just happen. And unfortunately, those kind of things happen, especially when you're a new person in a place, depending especially on the health of what was going on before you. You can step into a hornet's nest and be in a tough place there. What I would say to that is that you've got to show people that you care, right, about them, not just about the ministry and the music, but about them. I believe that ministry is about the people, not the music. And so you've got to show them that you got to show them you care. And sometimes it just takes time, my friend. Sometimes it just takes time for them to get to know you. I would say a big thing with that. Well, here, let me go back and say this. A leadership principle that you've got to learn is that if you ever have to say, I need you to recognize that I'm the leader here or I'm the authority here, you lose all credibility with leadership and authority. So you can't ever get to the point where you basically, I'm not saying you are, I'm just, this is I had to learn this concept as well. So I'm preaching to myself here. This is leadership. If you ever get to the point where you basically have to say, I'm the leader in front of everybody, and you need to recognize that, you just lost it with everybody. You've lost it with everybody. If you have individuals that you're having problems with, go talk to them privately. And you can typically work things out over a cup of coffee. And I would recommend that in a heartbeat. Say to somebody, hey, I'd like to get to know you better, especially if you're new. I would encourage you, if you're brand new in a ministry, take out everybody in your ministry for coffee. It's not expensive unless you get a $9 drink, but it's less expensive than a meal, right? So you can take a lot of people out for coffee on the price that you would pay for you and yourself a meal, right? And just having a cup of coffee or a drink with somebody there and just talking, right? And getting to know them. They want to know about you and you want to know about them. Talking about ministry and listening to them. These are people who are, and I'm talking about, I'm bringing up memories here of people. I mean, you're going to deal with difficult people all the time. But here's what I'd encourage you, and this for everybody. You need to remember that these are people who are carrying burdens. They're carrying trials and tribulations. They're carrying guilt of sin, or they've got sickness and death around them. A lot of times you need to, as a minister, figure out what's going on in their life, and you can minister to them in that way. And when that happens and they feel like you're there ministering to them, that's the shift. That's the change. They feel like you are their pastor, right? And they'll follow you to the ends of the earth there. In terms of musically, that might just take some coaching there, right, my friend? You may have to coach. They may not know, hey, the drummer needs to guide the time here. I play the piano. I feel like I should be the timekeeper here. Or, you can coach in those moments. But I think a lot of it's going to happen with you being with your people, getting to know them. A lot of that stuff will work itself out until it gets to the point where it doesn't work itself out. And then you kind of have to handle those situations as they come. Just be gentle, be understanding. I'll tell all y'all this: don't ever get to a moment of frustration in rehearsal where you fuss at somebody. Don't do it. It may make you think like you're going to feel so good. This person's, they just been waiting for it. And it might feel good in that moment. And I'm just telling you this from experience. That's all I am. I just want to give you what I have. It might make you feel good in that moment, but it will make so much more problem for you. So if there's something going bad in a rehearsal, let it go. And then address it later on one-on-one. Don't ever address anything in your rehearsal setting. So just that's what I have. That's 1 cent for you.
I would want to add in to keep your pastor in the loop.
Yes.
Because people will go to your pastor, and so you be the one to keep your pastor in the loop, right?
Yeah, there's a good saying in ministry that says, never surprise your pastor. Right? You may have heard this at this point. Don't ever surprise your pastor. So whether give him a heads up on a difficult conversation or an issue or a concern, because what Dr. Brown just said, people will go and fuss at you about you to your pastor. I can't believe Joshua does this and said, he did this. And then the pastor, he's got to address it in the way that he's learning about that there. So yeah, always keep him in the loop, especially even if you don't think it's a big deal. Hey, pastor, I just want to give you a heads up, man. I just had a conversation. I wasn't quite sure what happened. I just want to make sure you know about it. So very good point.
All right, keep going, brother.
Okay, so rehearsals. We kind of went over rehearsals there. We're on, our Wednesday format. I think I kind of went over that. Was that kind of clear to everybody, the Wednesday night thing? Any questions I can answer with that though?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you ever open the Bible in your rehearsals? Do you have devotional times? Do you have time to have devotional times? And how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do that every week. And I would encourage y'all to do that as well. Even if it's just a brief moment, you've got to tie that discipleship aspect, or you're just rehearsing music, right? Even though you're singing worship songs, you have an opportunity during a rehearsal. Your entire team is in front of you. Speak into their lives. Speak into that. So yeah, each and every week And typically what we do is we, before we dismiss altogether, so once we finish that 30-minute time altogether, we're at a good place there before we dismiss, where we've kind of been rehearsing for 30 minutes. And I'm very, you may not be able to tell it because this is Zoom, and I'm probably even more docile here on a camera than I am in person, but I'm usually pretty high energy and I talk a lot. So my rehearsals are pretty fast paced, and we're rolling the whole time. So that gives me a moment after about 30 minutes to kind of everybody breathes for a second. We just finished some high praise times and moments. And my accompanist kind of underscores a little bit under me, and I'll take just a couple of minutes. And I'm either tying in a scripture for Sunday, a devotional that I'm reading. I just finished my dissertation for my D-men, so I have lots of stuff to unload on them, which they love, you know, so pull something, have that devotional moment for a couple of minutes every week. Good. So then, yeah, so then Wednesdays, we have that entire rehearsal time. So we're 6 to 7:30. The first 30 minutes are all together and then split combined. And that really gives us the attention that we need for instruments and vocal music. So then on Sundays, what we do, the first thing that happens is a senior staff prayer meeting at 7:30 in the morning on Sunday mornings. That's, like I said, my pastor, my executive pastor, myself, and then the student/comm director. We get in, we go over any changes over the service that we want to. We then pray over the service together, these 4 guys. While all that's happening, media team is on site in the worship center setting up. So those guys arrive at between 7:15-ish to get on site. And that's audio and video guys. Lighting shows up a little bit later typically because, you know, he's kind of lazy, but we're working on him. You know, we're working on him. So, so yeah, so they're all getting ready. So then at 8 o'clock, we have a frontline vocal rehearsal. So from 8 to 8:30, it's just piano and our frontline vocals. And we're just singing parts and just hitting stuff to make sure everybody's fresh. This team are all auditioned, strong vocalists. And so, and the expectation is that they're listening and learning those parts during the week. You know, they get a lot of it at the Wednesday rehearsal, but they actually are expected to know that beforehand, because like I said, during that Wednesday night 6 o'clock rehearsal, I actually have whoever's singing on Frontline that Sunday on mic in the worship center while we're rehearsing to kind of give the choir a little something beefy to hold on to. We have eight vocalists, 8 frontline members every Sunday. That's 2 sopranos, 2 alto, 2 tenor, 2 bass. So 4 men, 4 women. And so that 8 o'clock time, they rehearse through 8 to 8:30. I'm able to fine tune parts, get balance going. Hey, tenors, this part right here, do this, do that. And that's happening.
How do you teach your parts? How do you teach your vocal parts? Is everything written out or something else?
It is, yeah. So pretty much everything's written out. And then one of my, so I mentioned another, like I have other staff positions. So I have what's called a frontline coordinator. It's a lady who oversees our front line. And then one of the things that she does is she actually creates what we call part tracks for all the music that we do. So like she'll take a song that we're doing on Sunday and she'll play the soprano part on the keyboard. So then our choir can access that soprano part, alto, tenor, bass on planning center. She does that for all of her music. Congregational and special music there. So then that's 8 to 8:30. At 8, was there a question?
Oh, I was going to ask if your frontline parts are different than the choral parts.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's the exact same part. Mm-hmm.
My question is about the rotation of volunteers.
Go ahead.
So how, I don't know if I'm speaking out enough, but how is your rotation of volunteers? Like, is there like a, you know, A team, B team type of rotation that all the singers sing together? You know, you're usually with the same team and then y'all take turns so that, you know, you can just attend church sometime. How is that going?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's actually one of the roles that the frontline coordinator does, is she rotates people out on a weekly basis. So it depends on how many singers I have for each section. So like my largest my two largest frontline singer sections are sopranos and altos. I have more ladies to rotate through. So those ladies might rotate every 4 or 5 weeks, depending on what's going on. Like my tenors, I think I've only got 3 guys right now. So those guys rotate more often than that. But they're on a rotational basis, and she just schedules them at random. The more you come to rehearsal, the more you get used, that kind of a thing. So does that answer your question in terms of rotation?
It does. I have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
So you said the more times you come to rehearsal, the more times you get used. So everyone is required to come to every rehearsal?
Yes. Yeah. So our requirement for our frontline singers is that you have to be an active member of the choir. You don't get to hold a mic and sing special parts and not be a part of the large group.
Amen.
So part of that incentive, like I was saying, is like with the frontline is for those who are active participants but have to miss sometimes, it's almost kind of like an infraction almost, like, hey, you haven't been to rehearsals lately, we're going to use you 1 time this month instead of twice. But we always want to encourage those people and build them up. So for the choir at large, I don't set attendance requirements per se. I track everything and I keep up with people via text message if they've missed rehearsals, but I don't maintain you have to maintain 80% attendance to sing in the choir because people have busy lives, and I would rather them be involved as much as they can, and I just address problems as they come. Like if I have somebody who comes once a month, I'm going to talk to them and just kind of figure that out. But with frontline or our rhythm section, I mean, those are positions where the expectation is much higher there, and they know that. They sign on with that before they join the team. So we lay that expectation out clear up front.
Their worship center, their sanctuary is very similarly sized and shaped to McCormick Chapel, just to give you all a frame of reference. And so like that choir loft is filled, and think about having frontline singers that need to fill up that whole space. That's why he's got 8. So, and your orchestra, there's if I remember correctly, there's kind of like a few steps down, like a kind of pit sort of thing in between the main platform. Then you step down orchestra, and then the choir is kind of up in the bleacher sort of things, right?
That's right. Yeah, we've got a recessed orchestra pit, I guess you could call it there. I can share a picture if you want. I don't know if you're able to see. I don't know if I can share a screen, something like that. I might be able to pull up something, but it's okay if not, if you prefer not. But yeah, any other questions on that?
I have one.
Yeah.
What is your audition or onboarding process for some of your other groups? Like, how do people get connected to the choir or the orchestra?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, so a lot of it is by word of mouth and trying to get people. I mean, we're really heavy recruiters. Like in a lot of ways, I see myself as like a coach recruiter, and trying to always get our people built in with trying to come and find things out. I'm a big believer in that it's the people in the ministry who will help attract other people to come, because usually, you're not going to go try out a choir on your own unless you sing a choir at another church and now you're here at this church and you want to. At least this is my perception. But like, hey, we're in a Bible fellowship class together. Hey, why don't you come, and you have a really great voice. I'd love for you to come, and I'm a member of our choir. Why don't you come with me? I find that we get more people coming and visiting for that than anything else. And then the process there is once they come to rehearsal, if they're wanting to join, they're enrolled. They're hooked up with all of our communication tools. So that's email, our Facebook page, our church Instagram. We use Remind, the text messaging system that school systems use. We use Remind to text message our people. Yeah, so then they're kind of they're given just a little list of like what happens in rehearsal times and when to be, where to be, that kind of a thing. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of our process.
Do you have volunteer people in choir that take care of a lot of that communication, or does that come from you? Yeah, no, so it's either it's mostly volunteer, but overseen by my admin assistant, Laura. So she kind of oversees all of our, it's mostly ladies, but we have ladies who handle, like for instance, choir. We have a welcome team for our choir. So when people are coming into the worship center to gather, I've got 4 or 5 people with lanyards on saying, worship welcome team or whatever it is that it says.
and they're kind of like hype people. You know, they're waving, they're smiling, they're getting people in, kind of creating this tone and atmosphere. And if you're a new person, that person's walking with you. It kind of models like a lot of what your churches do with a new guest that comes in. So this welcome team member would then walk these people over to our registration table. Hey, this is a brand new person. And then those ladies at that table take over with getting their information, signing a card, getting music booked. Hey, I'd like for you to sit with so-and-so this week, and then kind of connecting them. So it's kind of like a process that we do there.
I have a quick question. So when you stepped into your role as the worship pastor there, was the program an already big program with the choir, your worship team, the orchestra, or did you kind of have to revitalize that, bring people in? And if so, how did you do that?
Yeah, so there was a lot of, it was a big program before I stepped into it, but we were in the throes of COVID. So like when I came, we were running like upper 30s, low 40s in the choir. We're running about 80 or so right now. So it's been a lot of revitalization. But yeah, no, it was already a pretty large program before me. So no, we stand on the shoulders of those who go before us, for sure.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
There is something that he's not wanting to boast on himself though, because I understand that his predecessor was not as much of a choir person, and he has had a lot to do with the revitalization of the choir, and Joshua's very good at that. And you can tell by hearing it's not just the music, but it's a pastoral heart. This is one thing that I really hope you all get from this, because you can be excellent musicians, but music is just kind of what we work with. You've got to be looking at this as a pastor. Clearly, you're getting this heart from him, and I hope that's really communicating.
For sure.
Mm. Yeah, no, thank you, Dr. Brown. I think that is, I mean, because you're called to be pastor first. So that's why I'm glad to see y'all here in this classroom setting. So yeah, so then at 8:30, so we're back to Sunday, right? Where we have Sunday morning, 8:30 Sunday morning, that's when our orchestra and rhythm section arrive. And so then we do a 45 to 50-minute rehearsal this is basically everybody except for the choir. And we're going over everything for Sunday. So this is full tech, AVL, audio video lighting, and all of the music team except for the choir. They dismiss about 9:15, 9:20. We go over any tech items or needs that we need to, and then we make all that happen. Choir arrives in the choir room at 10:25 to have about 10 to 15 minutes to warm up and sing through anything that I need us to before we get ready. Orchestra pre-service piece usually starts approximately 5 minutes before the service. So I go in the worship center, catch a quick breath, and then about 10:40 we start the service, and then 10:45 we're off and going. So that's kind of a Sunday rundown there. Any questions on Sunday?
When's your day off?
So scheduled day off is on Fridays. You know, and so,
I like that qualifying word there, brother. Scheduled day off.
Day off is Friday. That's right. And so no, I'm pretty much a big fiend on making sure I take that day off, because as the Lord knows, and I do too, I put everything into what I do because I love ministry. I love what I do. So there are a lot of nights and weekends that I'm working, and my family doesn't need to take the brunt of what I'm doing. And so, yeah, no, Fridays, I try to be off on Fridays and Saturdays. Now, off usually just means I'm not in the office. You know, there's usually always something going on and that you're handling, but you've got to stay healthy in ministry, and you can get unhealthy real quick. So you got to have that time away.
Anything else from anyone? All right. Well, okay. So what was the most unexpected blessing that has happened to you in your ministry?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would say that probably the most, and it's hard to say unexpected, maybe the largest blessing is just seeing the Lord's faithfulness when you walk through tough times. You know what I mean? Because you're going to walk through moments. You're going to walk through moments in ministry that you want to leave the very next day. You're going to say, this is absolutely ridiculous. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. Because people are going to hurt you. They're going to say things that aren't true about you. This just is what it is. But the Lord will see you through those. If you keep your integrity and your character before God, you will be seen through those, and the Lord will draw you closer to him through those moments. Or you'll go through times where you just think things aren't going well. That's just ebb and flow of ministry. But seeing the Lord's faithful hand through those moments, I think has been probably the most, and that's why I say it's not unexpected. The Lord promises his faithfulness to us and for those who follow after him. But time and time again, I just go to the Lord to say, thank you, Father, about how he's worked something out, or how he's divinely allowed something to happen, or just the wonderful blessing that he pours out on us. So I would say that's a huge thing there. And so maintain your character and your integrity. I'm sure y'all see all over the news people in ministry falling left and right. Don't be afraid of ministry. The Lord's called you to it, and he's faithful to see you through that. But guard yourself, protect yourself, guard your families, protect your families. And remember that it's the call to ministry that's what keeps you in there. So when you walk through those hard moments, it's just that call to ministry that keeps you going.